October 1927. Tonight, a new film will open in New York. A special audience has been invited to come and see it and experience a dramatic innovation that the producers hope will change the whole future of the cinema. The jazz singer starts without synchronized sound. The audience follows what the actors are saying from caption cards. Then halfway through comes the moment everyone's waiting for.
Wait a minute. You ain't heard nothing yet. Wait a minute, I tell you. You ain't heard nothing. You want to hear Toot Toot Tootsie? All right, hold on. No, listen. Toot Toot Tootsie, goodbye. Toot Toot Tootsie, don't cry. The little choo-choo train that takes me away from you. You don't know just how sad it makes me. Kiss me, kitty, and then, ow, ow.
The talking picture is an immediate sensation.
It was just awe-inspiring to listen to Al Joseph singing on the film and also hear him. And a number of people just cheered and clapped too at that time when he did come on.
Millions already go to the cinema as their main form of entertainment. With the arrival of sound, the mass appeal of the movies will grow. All over the world, more people will find an escape from their daily lives at the cinema. Film's ability to enthrall and entertain, to persuade and to seduce, will be greater than ever. The first time people had paid to see pictures move was in Paris, just over 30 years before. At first, they found it marvel enough to watch everyday domestic scenes. But the simple, close-to-home films were just the beginning. Audiences were at the start of an extraordinary journey. In the new century, the system of lights and lenses that started as a curiosity was to transport millions into a different world of the imagination. Films had their earliest impact in poor city neighborhoods because they were cheap to watch. At first, they were included between the acts at variety theaters. But soon the new movies became substitutes for what could still be seen live at a higher price. A new audience could afford to watch daring young women take risks on the trapeze. And magicians who made them gasp. As filmmakers mastered their craft, they found they could enhance that magic. By 1910, there were over 10,000 Nickelodeons across the United States and Europe. In America alone, 26 million people watched movies each week. Abe Lass went to Nickelodeons in New York.
The silent movie house was the great escape. It was 3 for a dime. It was worth $3 million rather than 3 cents. The excitement and the escape that it provided. It was a dimension of our lives which were pretty constricted and pretty limited and pretty unimaginative and pretty unromantic. And here we found everything.
Films of the San Francisco earthquake were rushed to the Nickelodeons. At a time when few had traveled out of their own communities, they could see a wider world. But what people wanted most was stories, melodramas and adventures with a beginning, a middle, and an end. Caption cards were a problem for slow readers or those who couldn't read at all. As a boy, Luigi Cavalieri helped run a projector in Rome.
Erano giocattoli più che macchine da proiezione, era una cosa così artigianale.
They were more like toys than projectors.
E lì c'era una piccola manovella che
They were simple devices you worked by hand. There was a small crank that had to be turned. If it was a film with captions, you had to turn it slowly, otherwise nobody could read it. The children would shout,
allora vai più piano.
"Go slower," and you had to make the children happy.
Per farli contenti, ragazzini.
Silent films were international. No matter where they were made, anyone could understand them. Before the First World War, films were being produced in 25 countries. Studios from Sweden to Italy, France to the United States, competing to supply one another's audiences. No one nation dominated. Filmmaking spread to India, as well as China and Japan. Based on a Hindu myth, the first Indian film was completed in Bombay in 1913. For Indian audiences, it could be disturbing to see the traditional stories of the gods that they'd heard so often taking place before their eyes. Rajam Ramanathan lived near Bangalore.
It was as though God actually appeared in front of us. My grandmother would even pat her cheeks as penance whenever Krishna or Rama came onto the screen. We were fascinated by the cinema. It was amazing to see pictures dancing on the screen. It was our biggest excitement.
Around the world, a generation of children were the first to grow up with the cinema. Elizabeth Finn was a regular at her local picture house in West London.
The cinema was really an extension of our reading. It was stories. And it was great excitement. The biggest threat was if you don't behave yourself, you won't be allowed to go to the pictures on Saturday.
The music that accompanied the films was played by pianists like Rita Kay.
Where I was sitting, I could only get a sort of a side view of the film. We did try to fit the scenes with the appropriate music to give you the feeling that it fitted. And for instance, for a love theme, I would do something like this. Now, the next thing I think would be for a villain. There's always villains in the films, in the silent films. The short comedy films, we usually did something a bit jazzy, just to give you that little lift. Here goes.
By the end of the First World War, Europe was exhausted and the making of films had stopped. With so much to rebuild, films were a low priority. But in America, in the ideal climate of California, a powerful new force had been born in Hollywood. American filmmaking mushroomed to supply the huge home market. New studios were built, and directors like D.W. Griffith made ever more expensive and spectacular films. Way Down East was filmed on location in 1920. Close-ups were used to increase the audience's emotional involvement. In the 1920s, the making of celluloid dreams was industrialized. Hollywood exported more and more of its pictures, and with them went American values and the American dream. Comedies like The Gold Rush, with their visual humor, could be appreciated everywhere. International audiences found it easy to identify with Charlie Chaplin's Little Tramp as he faced the uncertainties of life.
We loved Charlie Chaplin, we adored him. And we literally were rolling on the floor with laughing, screaming with laughing. It was so funny.
Crowds flocked to the cinemas on the basis of Chaplin's name alone. He became as popular in Europe as he was in the United States. He was mobbed when he came back to London in 1921.
Oh, he was a great star then. Everybody said that as he was a British, he was born in England, he should have been made a knight. And my mother said, I'd make him king.
That year, Chaplin earned $1.5 million. This was a new sort of fame. He said, I am known in parts of the world that have never heard of Jesus Christ. Even in the new Soviet Union, Chaplin was a star. A Russian dance company paid him the compliment of mass imitation. And Hollywood's capacity to create stars was proof of the movie's new power. The studios used publicity in new ways to promote the actors they'd invested in. Millions of people were encouraged to follow the carefully orchestrated lives of a small group of actors and actresses. One couple became the ultimate symbol of glamour, living together at Pickfair, their estate in Beverly Hills. Each was already successful as an actor in their own right. When Douglas Fairbanks and Mary Pickford married, they were portrayed as a new form of royalty. Their lifestyle was beyond the aspirations of most of the audience. Lisetta Salis was in Rome.
Tutti questi film che venivano dall'America ci
all these American films were entertaining.
At
the same time, they made us feel backward, because the people in the films were wealthy, successful, happy and well-dressed. They made us feel wretched because we were poorer and less elegant.
But from the stars, people learned how to behave, how to smoke a cigarette. Audiences from Brazil to Germany studied the cars they drove and the luxurious homes they lived in. The cut of the stars' suits was scrutinized by tailors in Japan so they could make the clothes customers now demanded.
I remember the femme fatales thinking about their great loves and misfortunes. Many Italian girls tried to imitate them, to be femme fatales.
Women followed the way the stars did their hair. Kathleen Green was growing up in South Wales.
We all longed for golden curls, and I had a very short crop, which didn't suit me at all. So later on in life, I went for curls myself, and like a lot of other girls, we all, lots of curls, shoulder-length hair, and dressed ourselves up like the film stars. For in my dreams, I'm jealous of you.
Magazines suggested their readers could enter the glamorous world of the stars just by using the cosmetics they endorsed. In Britain, a cinema chain ran a contest with a film contract as first prize. But the road from Cricklewood, where the finals were held, to Hollywood was a long one. The winners did not find fame, but for a moment they could dream it was possible to appear opposite their idols.
I'm the king of Araby.
By the mid-1920s, Rudolph Valentino had emerged as the screen's greatest lover. For young men, his films gave unprecedented lessons in romantic behavior. George Williams learnt about seduction at his local cinema in East London.
What I did watch was the kissing technique of the hero with his girlfriend. I thought myself I would pick up a few tips from this, of this sort of technique for later on, for the time when I got fed up with football. And this might come in handy at a later date.
In the film Sherlock Jr., Buster Keaton played a shy cinema projectionist wanting to kiss his girlfriend but unable to get up the courage. Like many in the real-life audiences, Keaton looked to the screen to learn how. Inside the cinemas, audiences were able to behave as they couldn't elsewhere. Franco Ricci was in Italy.
We didn't have cars as they were very rare. It was risky to kiss someone in public because you could be fined or even arrested for a simple kiss in the street. So our refuge was the cinema.
Take your lessons at the movies and have love scenes of your own. When the picture's over and it's time to leave, don't forget to brush the powder off your sleeve. Take your girl into the movies if you come to make love at home.
The advance of the movies seemed a threat to the many church groups and politicians who wanted to be guardians of public decency. They feared a mass moral rot was setting in. In America, a commission was appointed under William Hayes to clean up the film industry's morals and standards. Arthur Abales's family ran a cinema.
They had the Hayes Commission. He used to be a postmaster general, and he drew up a list of things that you could and could not do. One of the things was there could be no kisses with two people in bed together, even if they were husband and wife. The man always had to have 1 foot on the ground.
The removal of anything explicit confused some young cinema-goers.
Because there was one film and a man was seen coming out of this woman's bedroom, and in the film there was the most awful fuss. So we couldn't make out what the fuss was about. And we decided between ourselves that he'd gone to bed with his boots on. It must have been that. Couldn't think of anything else to cause such a fuss.
Other countries followed, setting up boards of film censors to view each film before release and dictate changes. Their detailed rulings tried to eliminate any trace of eroticism. But just occasionally, some directors proved they could obey all the censors' rules and still rouse the audience. With the spread of radio in America in the late 1920s, people had a new alternative to the movies, and it was free. Fearing people would now stay at home, the film companies raced to perfect the invention which they hoped would keep their audiences: films with sound. When the first successful system was launched with The Jazz Singer in 1927, the impact was as great as they'd hoped, not just in America, but around the world.
On the stage, you know, with this show, I'm going to sing it jazzy. Now get this. Blue skies, smiling at me, nothing but little blue skies. Do I see? Do.
Questo canto, questa musica.
The singing, the music, this voice coming from the screen. The sound was so moving.
Era dal suono così emozionante.
We kept saying to each other, let's watch it again, let's watch it again.
E restiamo ancora una volta.
We watched the film 2 more times.
Siamo restate a rivedere questo film.
You like that, Mama? I'm glad of it. I'd rather please you than anybody I know of. Oh, darling.
The days of one international screen language were over. And even in Britain, people who thought they shared the same language were surprised.
Oh, I'm going to steal something.
We'd not heard American accents. We couldn't understand them at first. After a while, we got used to it. And then we all said, oh, yeah, and says you, and you ain't heard nothing yet. We were all doing this sort of thing. We got used to it. But it was as strange to us at the beginning as a foreign language.
Rita Kay in Scotland became a casualty of progress.
When the talkies arrived, this was a terrible blow for all musicians, including myself, because virtually I was only 18 then when the talkies took over in my cinema, and I felt I had only just got started. I had only just done a few years, and I felt really lost and didn't really know what was going to happen with the talkies putting us all out of work.
But there were other jobs to be had in the lavish new cinemas that were now being built. John Anderson worked in Boston.
Friday, Saturday, or Sunday, there were an enormous number of people that came into the Metropolitan Theater because it was a showplace of New England. And they had staff of probably 30 or 40 ushers in the theater. It was just awe-inspiring to see the theater itself, look up at the beautiful paintings on the stage. There was a painting of an Egyptian queen, and it was rumored that she had a diamond in her head.
Films were more popular than ever. In Britain, the distributors also encouraged the construction of new, larger cinemas equipped for sound. By 1930, 25 million Britons were going to the cinema each week.
Britain's super cinema is the Gaumont State at Kilburn, built to provide millions of Londoners and visitors from all over the world with the last word in luxurious entertainment. Inside the main entrance hall is the first wonder, a magnificent candelabra, a replica of the electrical fitting in the ballroom at Buckingham Palace.
At the grandest picture palaces, audiences entered a fantasy world even before the film began. Many walked on carpet for the first time. The new cinemas were the most advanced buildings of their age. They took a respectable place in the center of every city and town. In other parts of the world, films were finding new audiences. In India, country people were reached by traveling cinemas that came to their villages.
We'd go by bullock cart. We had a large family and all of us would go together. The cinema tents had open corners where you could sometimes sneak in without paying for a ticket.
In a country where audiences spoke so many different languages, the most popular Indian films were a long succession of songs, one after the other, that everyone could enjoy. In the West, sound also changed cinema news. Audiences began to rely on the newsreels as a major source of news and information that rivaled the newspapers. British newsreels in the 1930s sometimes reported a gloomy tale of industrial collapse.
His Majesty's visit to South Wales is not only a promise of new life, but a gesture of sympathy with men and women who for years have borne bravely the misery and sufferings of unemployment.
But in the main features that followed on the same screens, audiences looked for release and optimism. In Britain, as the textile industry was laid low, Lancashire's working-class heroine, Gracie Fields, appeared in Sing As We Go, an uplifting story of self-help.
It's no good. We'll have to pack up.
Well, Grace, this lot's knocked the song and dance out of you.
Oh, no, it hasn't, Longface. Come on, lads and lasses, let's lead the mill in good style. Sing as we go. Sing as we go, and let the world go by. Singing a song along the highway. Say goodbye to sorrow, and now it's tomorrow. And it's today.
By the end of the film, the magic of cinema ensured that the workers had all got their jobs back. As the United States lived through the worst days of the Depression and millions were out of work, many cinemas struggled to keep open. The Aberles family cinema was in New York's Bronx.
All around our cinema, there were bread lines. Nobody had any money. So we had to attract them with gifts, things like that. But the only way, really, to get people into a cinema, and they'll come, whether they're broke or they're not broke, is a good film.
Few American films dealt with the gritty reality of everyday life. During the Depression, Hollywood turned out spectaculars that were more lavish and fantastical than ever.
Flying down to Rio is memorable to me because of the girls on the wings of the airplane. And I don't think I had enough sense at that time to realize the impossibility of such a thing.
Films with a more serious intent were made by the totalitarian governments in Europe during the 1930s. Soviet cinema audiences were shown films with a direct political message. Feature films celebrated the achievements of communism. In Earth, farmers greeted the arrival in their village of one of the film's heroes, a tractor. When the Nazis took control in Germany, they knew that film could help establish a new national self-confidence. Propaganda chief Joseph Goebbels believed musicals could be German-made, the German way. Though he also commissioned documentaries and propaganda, he thought well-made escapist entertainment was the priority. In the late 1930s, the Italian dictator Mussolini took an increasing interest in films. He financed Cinecittà, a new studio complex in Rome, and the government took control over production. Films supported fascist values. Luciana Serra, pilot, told the story of a gallant but effective Italian pilot, one of a series of heroes who were building the new Italian empire. By the outbreak of the Second World War, all sides realized their battles had to be fought on the screen too. So great had the influence of the movies become. As Hitler seized more of Europe, one of the first German measures was to ban British and American films. After the fall of France, German-made films were shown in Paris. In one of them, German girls were seen dancing the can-can. But during the occupation, the French were allowed to go on making some films themselves. At a time when Germans made frequent identity checks, Michel Lequesne was in the resistance and usually kept away from cinemas.
I avoided places where you could be trapped, because there were sometimes raids, especially in the cinemas that young people went to.
Late in the war, I saw a film which made a great impact on me, The Night Visitors. Not only for me, but for all of us from that generation who were, at least in our hearts, resisting.
To German censors, the French-made film seemed an innocent love story set in the Middle Ages. The devil arrives in France and tries to persuade a woman to forsake her love.
We heard the devil exclaim,
Mais oui!
Sickness, war, plague, famine, it's always me.
But to the French who saw it, it was a parable of French defiance.
Comment non?
Non. It was obviously Nazism and Hitler faced by the resistance.
With Britain under aerial attack and the threat of invasion, the British government worked with producers to get approved messages across. And films used history to boost morale.
Now, my loyal subjects, a grave duty confronts us all. To prepare our nation for a war that none of us wants. Least of all, your queen. We have tried by all means in our power to avert this war. We have no quarrel with the people of Spain or of any other country. But when the ruthless ambition of a man threatens to engulf the world, it becomes the solemn obligation of all free men to affirm that the earth belongs not to any one man, but to all men. And that freedom is the deed and title to the soil on which we exist. Firm in this faith, we shall now make ready to meet the great armada that Philip sends against us. To this end, I pledge you ships, ships worthy of our seamen, a mighty fleet hewn out of the forests of England, a navy foremost in the world, not only in our time, but for generations to come.
Ina Turnbull was in London during the war.
The cinema gave us an escape from the raids, the war, the humdrum existence. And once you're in the cinema, you forgot everything. You just sat there, relaxed and sat back, and you lost yourself in the film. But there's one particular film we did see, Gone with the Wind. And this was this first epic film that had arrived over here. And then we came home. And we got bombed out. And we thought that was a huge joke, my sister. That was absolutely hilarious to think that we'd just seen Gone with the Wind and our house had gone with the wind. We thought it was hilarious.
Faced with disaster, the family were behaving with the chin-up spirit wartime films conveyed.
May often go wrong, let them hear your voice. You'll find that rhythm and song make the world rejoice. Make life go with the swing, laugh at trouble and sing. Tra-la-la-la-la-la-la-la, count your blessings and smile.
Feature films were produced to encourage Anglo-American cooperation.
Just a few more, one or two more, and the roll's complete. Here stands all of England, the guy in the sky, the boy on the farm, and the man on the street.
We would like to ask you why we're gathered here.
The reason you've been invited is to show the world that we're united. If you've a faith like mine, the stars are bound to shine. The skies will all be...
In America, cinemas were used to help pay for the war. War bonds were sold from booths in the lobby. All of Hollywood stars helped put across the message.
Bonds of freedom, that's what I'm selling, any bonds today. Scrape up the most you can. Here comes the freedom man, asking you to buy your share of freedom today. Many stamps today, give kiddies. We'll be blessed if we all invest in the USA. Sammy, my Uncle Sammy. Here comes the freedom man. You can't make tomorrow's plan. Not unless you buy a share of freedom today. Any stamps, any bonds today.
The star's ability to influence how women looked was harnessed to a new purpose.
Oh, so you really have another eye, Miss Veronica Lake. And you got to change your hairdo? Oh, no, not that way. Better call in a hairdresser. Yes, it's the last we'll be seeing of the famous Peekaboo Bang. The reason? By request of the War Woman Power Commission. In war plants all over the country, women have taken over many of the machines. Time is wasted sweeping back dangling locks. Danger, too, lurks in the hang-down hairdo. So war-working women follow Veronica Lake's suit. It's back to Grandma's styles once more with the upsweep. Women let their hair down once, but like Veronica, never again. At least, not for the duration.
And in the American Army, in the movie age, films were used as the best way of motivating troops as they left for the war zones. As film projectionist at his unit, Cy Locke showed Know Your Enemy, Japan.
Let me tell you, it was one of the most flamboyant films I think I've ever watched, as far as painting another people as absolutely merciless and ruthless. And its intent was to make us hate the Japanese. They were our enemy, and we were supposed to destroy them.
He has been trained to be a soldier almost from birth, and into his tough little mind has been drilled and hammered the fanatical belief that Japanese are descendants of gods and destined to rule the earth and all who live on it. To this end, treachery, brutality, rape, and torture are all justified if used against non-Japanese.
It really did leave an impression on me, because I was really indoctrinated, and indoctrinated very well.
When American troops came home from Europe and the Pacific at the end of the war, Hollywood stars were deployed to greet them, including Marlene Dietrich. In Europe, the jubilation at the coming of peace was followed by shortages and austerity. In damaged Italian towns where people were homeless and hungry, the Allies helped the cinemas reopen and supplied films that showed a better world.
After the war, everybody was demoralized. We needed an escape from all that misery, so the cinema was very important for everyone.
Once again, after another war, it was American film studios that were booming. In much of Europe, film production had been brought to a halt, but on both sides of the Atlantic, more people wanted to go to the cinema than ever before. In 1946, 90 million Americans went each week. The same American films filled the void in Europe. In Britain, admissions topped 31 million a week. During the war, the enemy and occupied countries had been starved of American films. Now they could see all the epics and musicals they'd missed. Hollywood and the American government ensured they were available. In 1947, 600 American films were distributed in Italy, but only 65 Italian films were made. European politicians and trade unions complained about an American invasion.
Personalities who claimed the limelight in the week's news were found in Paris. A film workers' demonstration disturbed the calm of the French capital Sunday. The film workers claim that the agreement permitting American films to enter France is killing French productions.
European governments tried to help their own film industries. Italian filmmakers dealt with the grim social problems of the time.
Senti, guarda che non ho capito bene. Che hai detto? Fermi, tanto, fermi molto. E invece rimedia, Antò. Che non si può rimediare?
Ma che te vuoi rimediare? Ci vuole la bicicletta. Subito.
But the realistic films many post-war directors wanted to make weren't usually what the audience wanted to see.
Even bad American movies were better than Italian films. I always dreamed about America, and anyone like me who dreamed about America has said, I was born in a village, but I have to go to America. I didn't know how to make this dream come true, but it was important to state, I must go to America.
For Europeans, Hollywood films, with their stars and big budgets, were as hypnotic as ever. American musicals of the late 1940s were aggressive displays of American values.
We've sailed the seas and we've been the world over, Maine to Mandalay. We've seen the Sphinx and seen the cliffs of Dover, but we can safely say the most fabulous sight is New York in the light of the day. Our only day.
New York, a wonderful town. The Bronx is up and the Battery's down. The people ride in a hole in the ground. New York, it's a wonderful town.
In the East, Soviet bloc audiences were offered films that could be as spectacular as Hollywood's. But the stars were different. In America, a great social transformation was underway. Suburbs were springing up, and a new way of life came with them. The fact that families had more money and time to use their leisure in other ways led to a decline in cinema going. Arthur Aberlis was now a film distributor, facing falling audiences.
People got out of the habit of going twice a week with the family, and they became selective. We had the onslaught of television, which absolutely made everybody afraid of what was happening and what was going to happen.
A feature film, Meet Mr. Lucifer, attempted to deride the rival that was coming into people's homes.
Holy
fly. There's a devil in it.
Hardly been a century when I haven't thought up some mechanical device to make the human race utterly miserable. There are lots of people waiting to be made miserable. Down periscope.
Wouldn't it be wonderful if we could have...
What?
A television set.
He did all sorts of things to regain audiences. All sorts of things that you couldn't get on television. The main one being 3D. It really didn't establish itself because of those damn glasses you had to wear, driving everybody crazy.
Cinemas tried changing the shape of the picture to see if that would help.
As I was saying, this motion picture was photographed in the grandeur of CinemaScope and in gorgeous, lifelike color by Deluxe. Gorgeous, lifelike color by Deluxe.
CinemaScope was launched just when television was growing fastest. Fewer people went to the cinema each year in America and Europe. From 31 million in 1946, British audiences dropped to 10 million a week in 1960 and carried on downwards. Thousands of cinemas were demolished or converted to other uses, leaving only memories.
Well, that's the place where we saw our favourite film stars and our favourite films, and as I say, we went there to see Charlie. We went there to see Winkle, as we called him, Harold Lloyd. We went there to see Mary Pickford. That was the place where they lived, and now I get thrilled as I pass it now.
È stata sicura una grandissima esperienza.
It was a great experience. It was everything.
Saper vivere, saper comportarsi, saper parlare, saper camminare.
It was about how to live, how to talk and walk, how to be courted, how to approach your first love. For me, it's been everything.
Veramente io dei ricordi bellissimi
I have beautiful memories.
Non mi ricordo niente.
Sometimes I don't even remember what I did yesterday, but I remember these scenes. I will remember them forever.
Qui, proprio incamerate e te lo ricorderai sempre.
But in places where Western living standards were an inaccessible dream, cinema's appeal was as strong as ever, and its place in national life just as important. A growing audience watched films all over South America, China, and the rest of Asia. In India, traveling tent cinemas took films out to villages still unreached by television. People with few other diversions looked to them for their main entertainment. Popular Indian films stayed away from reality. They supplied sex, sentimentality, and, increasingly, spectacle. Chandralekha, made in 1948, was the first in a succession of new Indian blockbusters. India had great national stars who set fashion and styles of behavior millions followed. The national film industry grew, centered in Bombay. The studios worked frenetically to supply the established formula of songs and glamour which their audiences demanded. By 1960, India had overtaken the United States and was making more films than any other country in the world, and drawing the largest audiences. Cinema was continuing to change people's aspirations. In much of the world, the power of the moving image on the big screen was still unrivaled.